Hello, so today we're going to be talking about basically writing the equation of a polynomial function given a graph. Okay, so if you can take a look at number 19, it says the graph of f of x is shown below. Write the equation of f of x in factored form. Okay, so in order to do that, we're first going to take a look at the zeros, right? We have a 0 at x equals -3, a 0 at x equals -1, and a 0 at x equals +2. Okay, so we know that the factors that correspond with these zeros have the opposite sign, right? So the factor that corresponds with x equals -3 would be x plus 3, and so on. So when we go to write the equation, right, of f of x in factored form, we can write f of x equals, and I want you to leave a little space after the equal sign, and then let's list out the factors. X plus 3, x plus 1, and x minus 2. Okay, so the reason why we left a space here is we wanted to leave room for what we call the leading coefficient. And all that is a number that could be in front of our equation, right? So there could be a number here. It could be, a 5, a 2, a -3. It could be anything, but we have to determine what is that leading coefficient. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to call it, I usually just use a C for coefficient. I'm going to call it a C for right now, and we're going to solve for it. Now, in order to solve for this C, we need to substitute numbers in for every other variable we see in the equation. So I'm going to pick a point on the graph, and usually the easiest point to pick, I find, is the y-intercept. So see this point right here? The coordinates of that would be 0, 6, right? The x-coordinate is 0, and the y-coordinate is 6. So what we're going to do is, within this equation right here, anywhere we see an x, right? I see an x here, here, and here, we're going to replace it with a 0. Okay, so for right now, I'm going to bring down, we're solving for c, so I'm going to leave that as a c. I'm going to write 0 plus 3, 0 plus 1, and 0 minus 2. Because again, since x is 0, I'm replacing all the x's with zeros. Now here it says y is 6, right? Now we don't technically see a y, but do you remember when you see f of x, right? That's basically another way of saying y equals, all right? So let me actually put this over here. Y is the same thing as when you see an f of x in an equation, right? This is function notation. This is the function in terms of x, but it means y equals. So wherever we see f of x, we're going to replace it with a 6. Okay, so let's solve for c. So I'm going to bring down the 6 equals c, and then 0 plus 3 is 3, 0 plus 1 is 1, and 0 minus 2 is -2. So all I did was simplified what was in each of these parentheses. Okay, now, on the right-hand side of the equation, right, let's multiply these numbers. 3 times 1 times -2 is -6. Okay, so these multiply together to give me -6. And I'm going to bring everything else down. So I have 6 equals c times -6. Now we're trying to get the c by itself, right? So to get rid of this -6, the opposite, it's c times -6. The opposite of multiplication is division. We are going to divide both sides of the equation by the number that the c is being multiplied by, because then those will cancel, and we got c alone. And over here, 6 divided by -6 is just -1. So that's our leading coefficient. What we want to do is we want to take this number and substitute it back in where c is into the original equation. Okay, so what I did was I brought the f of x down. I replaced this c with the -1 that we just solved for, and I took my 3 factors and brought them down. And this right here is my equation in factored form. Okay, now what's super important to do is to check. Actually, let me see if I can move this over a little. Perfect. All right, so what I did was I went to y equals, and I just plugged in this equation here. We can't see the whole thing, but trust me, it's in there. And then I'm going to hit graph, and let's see, does my graph look like what we see there? Yeah, it sure does, right? Same graph. So there we go. Okay, so let's take a look at number 20. We're going to do the same thing. So we have a 0 at x equals -5. So we know the factor that corresponds with that, I'm going to put it down here, would be x plus 5. And we have a 0, right here at x equals -1. So we know the factor that corresponds with that is going to be x plus 1. And we have another 0 right here at x equals +1. So the factor that corresponds with that would be x minus 1. Now something very important, okay, if you remember, if you look right here at x equals -5, it doesn't cut through the x-axis, right, like it does here and here. It hits the x-axis and then bounces right back off. Okay, if you recall, right, it has multiplicity here. So we know that what we need to do is we need to put a square on our factor. Okay, and it kind of makes sense because think about it. We have 1, 2, 3, 4 directions. So we want to have 4 x's, right? X times x, that square gives us 2 of them here, another x and another x. So altogether we have 4 of them. Okay, so let's write out our function. This time, be very careful. Don't write f of x. They say g of x. If it says g of x, you have to use, what they give you. So we're going to write g of x equals, we're going to put, this time we're going to jump right in and put that c there for the leading coefficient. And then let's copy down our factors that we just found. Okay, so now we want to look at our graph and we want to pick a point, right? We want to pick a point that we could plug in for this g of x here and for these x's. Now, I always find the easiest one to be the y-intercept. You could pick any point that you could clearly see the coordinates of, but the reason I picked the y-intercept is because the x value here is 0, and when you plug in zeros for x's, it just makes your life a little easier. Okay, but I'm going to pick the y-intercept, which is right here. And it looks like if this is 50, right, it's going -10, -20, -30, -40, -50. This is midway between -20 and -30, so this is going to be, the y value is at -25. All right, so the coordinate here would be 0, -25. Okay, so this is our x coordinate. And the -25 is the y coordinate, which in this problem we're using g of x. Right, we're using a g of x. So we're going to replace the g of x with -25. I'm going to bring down my c because that's what we're solving for. And I'm going to replace all 3 of these x's with a 0. All right, and let's solve. So I'm going to bring down the -25. And then 0 plus 5 is 5. Now there's a square on that, so 5 squared would be 25. And then here, 0 plus 1 is 1, and 0 minus 1 is -1. Now when we multiply together the 25 times 1 times -1, that's going to give us -25. Okay, so I'm going to bring this down, I'm going to bring this down, and again, when we multiply these 3 numbers together, we get -25. All right, so since this side of the equation says c times -25, the opposite of times, right, the opposite of multiplication is division. So to get rid of that -25, we're going to have to divide both sides by -25, and that leaves us with c equals 1. Anything divided by itself is 1. So we're going to go ahead and take this 1 and substitute it back in place of the c. Now, to be honest, if it's a 1, you don't even have to put it. If you want to put it just to show, you solved and put it there, you can, but you don't have to. Because if you don't put it there, it's implied that the leading coefficient is 1. So this is our answer, but I'm going to check it in the calculator. Okay, so I went to y equals, I plugged in the whole equation, but be careful with this one, okay? If I hit graph, look at my window. It's not going to match our normal window, okay? Along the x-axis, if you go from -10 to +10, that's fine. But look at our y-axis. This is down at -50 and +50. It actually goes higher than 50, right? So I'm going to hit window. And I'm going to leave my x-axis alone, okay? I think the x-axis from -10 to +10 is fine, right? X min -10, X max +10. But let's talk about our y. I'm going to set the y minimum to -50. So I'm going to scroll down here where it says y min. I'm going to make that -50. And then for my y max, this right here is at 50. I'm going to make it a little higher, right? This would be 60. We could go even higher. I'm going to make it my y max. I'm going to make it 60. And I'm going to hit graph. And let's see if we have the same thing. Yep, check that out. We have the same thing. You could always go to the table of values and make sure the points are fit exactly, but as long as you know it has the same general look, you should be good to go. Okay, so we're going to take a look at one more together, so number 21. So I just labeled this here. We have zeros at x equals -2 and x equals +5, okay? So that tells us that our factors are going to be at x plus 2, right? We reverse the signs, and then x minus 5. Now, both of these right here, right? Instead of cutting through the x-axis, they're hitting the x-axis and bouncing off. Okay, so we know that we have multiplicity here. When we have multiplicity, we need to put squares on these factors. Okay, so there's 2 of these and 2 of these. All right, so I'm going to write out, they're using f of x this time. So f of x equals, we use a c for the leading coefficient, and then we have an x plus 2 squared, and then an x minus 5 squared. Okay, now, if you look here, I always say the point on the y-axis is the easiest one to use, so I'm going to use this point right here, 0, 80. Okay, so we know that 0 represents the x, so wherever I see an x in this equation, I'm going to replace it with a 0. And I mean, I know I see an x here. This says f of x. I mean, you could, if you wanted to, you could write f of 0, but that's not going to help you. You want to get this function notation out of the equation so that we could solve for c. So we know that f of x is kind of like another way of saying y. So I'm going to replace the f of x with 80. And then I'm just going to bring down the equals and the c. All right, so we have 80 equals c times 0 plus 2 is 2, and 2 squared is 4. And then we're going to multiply that by 0 minus 5 is -5, and -5 squared, right? -5 times -5 is positive 25. Okay, so we have 80 equals c times 4 times 25 would be 100. And then to get the c by itself, we're going to divide both sides by 100. And then we know that 80 divided by 100, right, simplifies to 4 over 5. So that's a 4. Okay, and that's what c is equal to. So now we're going to take that 4/5 and put it in place of c into that original equation. Okay, and there we have it. Now I'm again going to check with my calculator because I always want to make sure that I have, the right equation. Okay, so I go to y equals, right, and I type this in. And I'm going to have to fix my graph. Let me just move this over. Because if we look here, this is going all the way up to 200. So I think my x-axis should be fine, right? Because if I hit window, my x min is -10 and my x max is 10. So -10 and 10, that seems good. But as far as the y-axis goes, I mean, I could leave my y minimum at -10, right? I'm not dropping below the x-axis, but my maximum, I need to make it all the way up here at 200. So let me scroll down and make this y max say 200. And now I'm just going to hit graph, and let's see if the graph looks like our picture. Yep, there we go. So it looks like we have the right equation.